How do you come up with designs for fantasy characters? This is a problem I recently ran into while working on an art contest, the Lospec Jam 3. I'm going to walk you guys through the process that I used to design 3 different characters. They're bugs, and they're the heroes of a mock-up for a turn-based RPG. I'm going to give each of them an attack, and then we'll design their ultimate villain. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Robinson of Robinson Pixels. Let's start with our main character, the Swordfighter. The contest was to design a fake game for a fake system, the TCH engine, which is the newest in low-spec console royalty. That got me thinking my lead could be royalty. And what is more royal than a queen? An ant queen. I made a few different versions of the sprites that kind of sucked, so we're going to skip past that and jump straight into the one that I actually used. I used Primrose from Octopath Traveler and Chrono from Chrono Trigger as style references. They're both 32 pixels tall, so I'm aiming for something in that range. As for our Swordfighter, her name is Lady Annette. I did a lot more reading about ant colonies than I ever expected, but it turns out that ant queens don't really leave their colonies pretty much ever. So for her to be setting out, I figured there's gotta be a good reason. And that reason must be that her colony was taken, and she's on a quest to get them back. This isn't something ant queens actually, do, so I figured she's gotta be young and naive. That informed my decision to give her really vibrant and shiny armor. But what really sold me on this design feeling right to me as an artist is when I bumped up her boot size. Something about a big shoe makes a character feel balanced to me. That's just my art style though, and that's something you feel out over time. Now, ant queens have wings, so I drew in some basic ones. Then I gave her a sword, and yes, I did make the sword green so it would look like a blade of grass. I changed her color scheme for some better contrast, and then I was reading more about ants because that's apparently just what I do with my life now, and it turns out that once they actually start a colony, they lose their wings. For her attack, I started out with just a sprite edit by leaning her forward. I figured she's so new to fighting that she would not be elegant with her weapon, so it's just a bit of a wild slash attack. I should have started with the ending keyframe without the slash effect, but I wasn't actually planning on doing multiple frames at the time, and in the interest of time, I'm still only gonna do 2. I did want to make sure her whole body was involved. That's part of the fun of working with non-human characters. So her antennae, they curl down defensively, and her abdomen kinda angles up to be a little more dynamic. Once I decided I was gonna add a final frame without that slash effect, I did struggle a bit with the sword. I thought I had it pretty good at first, but it's facing the wrong way, like she slashed it backwards. But I do think after I redrew it multiple times that I finally got it there. With Lady Annette finished, let's give her a team. Now, most teams will have a big muscly member of the team, like a tank-like character, and that one's normally the Brawler, but I didn't want to do that. Let's make it the Mage. Once I got this idea in my head, I could not let it go. Her Mage is Wormy. Wormy is a character I designed for the Nokia Art Jam. It was a 1-bit challenge, and I really wanted to see what he would look like in 16-bit instead. I started with blobbing in the apple. It's bigger than before, but obviously still pretty small for an apple. I actually did some research on this, and it turns out the world's smallest apple is called the Tiddly Palm. So, I guess he's in a Tiddly Palm. For updating Wormy to a fantasy setting, I decided to give him a wizardly beard, and for now, a cloak. I thought it was fun to give him hair, but I didn't want to lose the eyebrow silhouette, so I made his hair extra pointy with that same shape. Kinda helps him retain that characteristic. At this point, it's clear Wormy has aged since his first appearance, so maybe the apple should age too. I drew in some rotting spots using some nasty green colors. And while I think this is a big improvement, it still doesn't look as realistic as I wanted. That's where dithering can really come in handy. I don't like to overuse dithering, but for larger objects like this, it makes a drastic difference. Back to Wormy, his cloak doesn't read as well as I wanted it to. Removing it takes away his regality. Now he looks like a cranky old man. It's like I'm trying to pull a Logan with my little hero. And look, I get it. People like Logan. Unpopular opinion, I don't like ever taking my heroes and making them cranky, depressed, sad old men. I don't enjoy this. So I'm not gonna do it to him. I'm gonna make him a cranky, depressed, sad, middle-aged man. Maybe he spent years alone defending his apple from hungry animals, and Annette finds him and help him fend off some snakes. Then he pledges his life to help her in finding her colony. I thought a standard staff with an orb would be the way to go, and this is actually how he looked when I submitted the piece for the contest. But while I was reviewing the silhouette later, it hit me. This isn't a staff, it's a sucker! I redrew the thing, first as just a shiny orb, and then I added in that weird loop thing that goes around some lollipops. The important part for me was getting the colors high contrast, so it would look good and shiny. For his attack, he'd need to aim his sucker wand forward. And since he's a worm with no arms, that meant his head would have to tuck back closer to the apple itself, so his tail could go forward. I also actually crunched down his forehead by 1 pixel and opened his mouth, and that helped push that angry expression he'd have while shooting. Then it was mostly just a matter of redrawing the sucker, which was much easier when it's sideways like this. And to make it look like he was actually shooting, I added a yellow overlay layer for a blast effect, and yanked in his tail for some recoil. 2 down, 1 to go, let's round out this party with the Brawler. I decided to make another ant for the Brawler, and I did this specifically so I would have to challenge myself by making a unique character with a very similar body type. So this ant, we'll call her Red. She's also a queen, but she'll get to keep her wings once I add them in. You see, ant queens only lose their wings after they've started a colony. I figure she was in love with another ant, and she flew out to meet him, but when she got to their meeting place, he wasn't there. He and his entire colony were already wiped out, taken by the same big bad who took Annette's colony, and we will be designing the big bad next. Red has spent her entire life in the forest alone, fighting for survival, hence the foresty vibes of her outfit and the lack of weaponry. She'll just punch anything in her way. She sees herself in young Annette, and while she thinks it's a lost cause, she can't help but take her under her wing. Under her wing. You see what This is one of those things that doesn't look good until it's done, but what really sells it in the end is the extra rendering in the blue parts of the wings. That helps it look more scaly and bug-like. Her attack was actually the most difficult of the 3 because I had to fully redraw her. Always make very small commitments when you're first designing a sprite. Be real blobby, not detailed, because you could need to pivot at any time. Like for my first draft, I was doing a karate jump kick, but it wasn't working. Eventually I realized because the sprite just doesn't make any sense. There's a momentum problem. She has wings, or she will when it's done, and a character with wings wouldn't need to do that style of running leap. For the second version, I did a different style of a pose, which actually would make sense for someone with wings. She just kind of floats up and kicks. I put the original sprite underneath at low opacity, so I could make sure I kept all the elements the same size, like her face and later her wings. The biggest struggle was making sure her legs were the right length, which is a little difficult with such small sprites. Add in a quick and dirty smear frame, and we've got a kicking Brawler. Now we've got our trio, but who are they up against? It's time for the big bad. If you thought the final boss would be like a really big wasp, or an angry frog, or an anteater, it would make sense. I considered all of those options. But you know what's even more difficult for a few ants and a worm to defeat? The Goddess of Death. I sketched out what she might look like, and I placed that on its own reference layer. Then I started coloring in over that layer, knowing I would change it as I felt I needed as I went along. I made the goddess purple because that's the royal color. I figured that makes her more royal than our ant queens. At first, I was going for a real human appearance, but she just looks a little disappointed. I needed scary, so first I took out the eyes, and then I went full skull. I did give her antlers because I wanted a connection to nature, since death is normally natural. As usual, the hands were the most difficult part for me. The larger your sprites, the better you have to be at realistic anatomy. So while the ants are only 32 by 32 pixels, the goddess ends up being 92 by 125. She's a big lady. Side note, I find it so funny that like this giant evil goddess of death in real life would be like 6 inches tall. I decided that snake-like scorpion tail thing I was working on looked weird, so I went with a classic ripped toga. When you're drawing fabric, try to keep in mind the folds are not really random. They're being pulled from different directions. Her belt is holding in a lot of fabric, so that would be the source for a lot of the wrinkles in the toga going down. The lantern itself is inspired by ancient Greek designs that I found on Google. I chose a lantern because I feel like the spirits of the dead usually use lamps to guide people to the afterlife, but also because a lot of bugs are, attracted to light. Maybe she uses this to lure insects in to capture their souls. After that, I spent another hour cleaning up this sprite because pixel art is hard. And then I spent another hour making her final attack, the bug trap, which I'll show you right now in this final mock-up for a battle for the souls of 2 colonies. Pixel people, I present to you Final Fantasy. Alright, while we've been discussing character design, I do think it's also important to design all of your scene with a meaning. And to do that, check out my video on the first Lospec competition that I took part in, right over here. I used Primrose from Octopath Traveler and Chrono from Trogo Riffer.